Do you think being cheated on is already humiliating? Wait until you discover that the guy who destroyed your marriage looks like a badly rendered side character from a 2000s video game. There is a kind of pain that does not come only from betrayal. It comes when you look at your wife's lover and think, she threw our life away. For this. Not for a movie star. Not for some mysterious millionaire. Not for someone who could at least justify the self-esteem crisis. But for a man whose appearance made a forgotten potato at the back of the pantry look charismatic. And that is exactly what happened to Brian Walker for 12 years. Brian believed his marriage to Amanda was the kind of relationship that could survive time. It was not perfect. No marriage is. There were bills to pay, laundry to fold, inconvenient silences, and occasional arguments about who had left the garage light on all night. But there was something that, in his mind, was unshakable: trust. Amanda was beautiful in an elegant way, the kind that did not require effort. Always flawless brown hair, a smile trained to charm any room, and an almost supernatural ability to make Brian feel like he had won the lottery of life. When they got married, his friends joked that he had outperformed his own league. Brian agreed. They had 2 children, a comfortable house in the suburbs, and a predictable routine. And sometimes predictability is mistaken for safety. Brian discovered in the worst possible way that safety can be nothing more than a house of cards. Decorated with pretty picture frames, the first signs were as subtle as a crack behind a painting. Amanda started smiling at her phone. Not that casual smile someone gives when seeing a meme. It was the smile of someone who had a secret and enjoyed having it. She also started protecting her phone with the vigilance of a CIA agent guarding nuclear codes. Work stuff, she would say. Brian believed her. Because when you love someone, your brain becomes a relentless defense attorney. Every strange behavior receives a plausible explanation. Every suspicious detail gets the benefit of the doubt. Love, sometimes, does not wear a blindfold. It wears fogged-up glasses. Then came the last-minute meetings, the unexpected outings, and the sudden concern with the gym, makeup, and lingerie Brian never saw outside shopping bags. His intuition began to whisper, and intuition, like a nosy neighbor, usually knows before everyone else does. On a rainy Thursday, Brian came home early after a meeting was canceled. He found Amanda in the shower and her phone vibrating repeatedly on the kitchen counter. He did not mean to look. At least that is what he told himself. But some decisions feel less like choices and more like summons from fate. A notification appeared on the screen. I can't wait to smell you again. No name. Just a ridiculous fire emoji. Brian felt his stomach drop like an elevator with severed cables. His hands went cold. His heart raced. And in that moment, he realized that some messages can demolish years of trust with the efficiency of a wrecking ball. With trembling fingers, he unlocked the phone using their oldest daughter's birthday. A classic. When someone thinks they are being clever, they usually choose the most predictable password on the planet. What he found looked like an entire season of betrayal in high definition, months of conversations, photos, voice messages, declarations, inside jokes, plans for meetings, and buried in all of it, a name. Klaus. Amanda had saved him as G because apparently creativity had also resigned from that marriage. Brian clicked on the profile picture. And then something happened that he never imagined he would feel in that moment. Confusion. Because the man in the picture looked like a statistical accident. Klaus had thin hair, desperately trying to cover a forehead the size of a parking lot. His mustache looked like it had been drawn with a child's pencil. His teeth had the architectural arrangement of a neighborhood after an earthquake, and his expression carried the energy of someone who sold counterfeit alarms in a dying mall. Brian blinked several times, zoomed in on the photo, closed it, opened it. Again. It did not improve. It was real. His wife, a sophisticated, intelligent, absurdly attractive woman, was risking her family for a man who looked like he had been assembled from evolution's rejected parts. And strangely, that hurt even more. Because if Klaus had been an irresistible heartthrob, Brian could at least blame biology, vanity, or some understandable delusion. But that was an existential insult. It was like discovering that your Ferrari had been traded for a shopping cart with a crooked wheel. Amanda came out of the shower and found Brian sitting at the table, motionless, holding the phone. Her face lost all color. Brian. He raised his eyes and asked with frightening calm. It was for him. She started crying before she could even form a sentence. And when someone starts crying that quickly, they have usually been rehearsing excuses for months. That night, Amanda confessed everything. The affair had lasted 8 months. Klaus worked at the outsourced accounting firm connected to her office. He was divorced. He lived in a tiny apartment. He drove a beige sedan whose color seemed to apologize for existing, and according to Amanda, he made her feel seen. Brian almost laughed. Because for 12 years he had seen Amanda in every possible version of herself: pregnant, sick, exhausted, insecure, happy, frustrated, vulnerable, but apparently to be seen. One needed aggressive receding hairlines and reheated coffee breath. The following week, Amanda temporarily moved in with her sister. The children were spared the details, and Brian tried to rebuild his sanity while alternating between sadness and an almost comical urge to ask the universe whether this was some kind of cosmic prank. But the story was still far from over, because weeks later, Brian received a call from an unknown number. It was Klaus. Brian almost hung up immediately. For a few seconds, he stayed silent, hearing only the man's uneven breathing on the other end of the line. It was not the confident breathing of a conqueror. It was not the voice of someone who had won. It sounded more like a man who had just realized he had bought a one-way ticket into a fire. "I think you deserve to know a few things," Klaus said. His voice was surprisingly weak. Brian had expected arrogance, maybe some territorial male provocation. Instead, he heard the audible equivalent of a deflating tire, driven by morbid curiosity. Brian decided to listen, and that was when the story took such an absurd turn that, for a few minutes, Brian even forgot he was the one being cheated on. Klaus explained that Amanda had not told the whole truth. In fact, she had painted Brian as an emotionally abusive, controlling, cold husband, practically a blend of domestic dictator and tax auditor. According to Amanda, she lived trapped in a loveless marriage, enduring a man incapable of showing affection. Brian let out a short, bitter laugh. It was fascinating to discover that, while he was paying the mortgage, taking the kids to the dentist, making breakfast on Sundays, and remembering birthdays, even Amanda forgot. Behind the scenes, he had been promoted to official villain of the narrative. But Klaus had not even reached the best part yet. Over the past few months, Amanda had been demanding money, a lot of money. First to solve personal problems, then to cover the separation, later to secure a future for the children. Klaus, who apparently possessed the explosive combination of low self-esteem and the judgment of a hamster, had given her everything he could. He emptied his savings, took out loans, maxed out credit cards, sold an old motorcycle he was more proud of than he probably should have been. In total, he had transferred more than $40,000 to Amanda. Brian went silent, not out of sympathy, but because he was trying to process the fact that his wife had not only cheated on him, but had also turned her lover into an ATM with receding HAIRLINES. Klaus continued. The previous week, Amanda had pressured him to rent a bigger apartment, so the two of them could officially start their new life together. That was when Klaus, for the first time in months, experienced a flash of clarity, a statistical miracle. He asked Amanda to show proof that she was really in the process of getting divorced. She asked for more time. Cried. Accused him of lacking trust. The full package. At that moment, something in Klaus's brain finally switched on. Maybe the last working light bulb in that faulty electrical system. He began to suspect that he was not the protagonist of a love story. He was just the sponsor. Brian listened to everything with a strange feeling that his personal tragedy had turned into a dark comedy written by a cruel screenwriter. Amanda was not in love. Amanda was doing emotional arbitrage. She extracted attention from one side and money from the other. Like the CEO of Sentimental Chaos, when the call ended, Klaus said in a defeated tone, "I know I don't deserve your compassion. I just thought you needed to know." Brian replied with brutal sincerity, "Don't worry. You've already been punished enough," and hung up. That night, Amanda showed up at Brian's house, swollen eyes, smudged makeup, the posture of someone who, for the first time, had realized every emergency exit was locked. Klaus had blocked her everywhere. The transfers stopped. The dream apartment evaporated. Her sister was already tired of hosting her. And suddenly, Brian once again looked like what he had always been. The safe harbor she had treated like an old piece of furniture. Amanda cried, said she had made a mistake, that she had been confused, that she had never stopped loving Brian, that Klaus meant nothing. That last sentence almost made Brian applaud. Nothing is a fascinating word, especially when that nothing cost 8 months of lies to destroyed homes and $40,000, pulled from a man who looked like a discarded character from a low-budget animation. Brian listened to it all in silence. No shouting. No insults. No theatrical scenes. When Amanda finished, he simply said, "You did not trade me for a better man. Not for a great love either. You traded me for the thrill of manipulating people. And that is much worse." Amanda collapsed. But some sentences work like mirrors, and some people cannot stand their own reflection. The divorce was finalized months later. Brian kept shared custody of the children. The house was sold. The finances were reorganized. And little by little, the silence stopped being painful and became therapeutic. Amanda made occasional attempts to reconnect, messages on special dates, nostalgic memories. Old photographs, tiny emotional hooks cast into waters that no longer contained fish. Brian did not bite. As for Klaus, Brian heard through mutual acquaintances that he had declared personal bankruptcy and moved back in with his mother. The beige sedan continued to exist, probably out of pure mechanical stubbornness. Amanda, meanwhile, began living alone in a modest apartment, carrying the strange company of her own choices. But the moment Brian would never forget happened. Almost a year later, he was organizing old boxes when his youngest daughter walked into the office. She was holding a family photo taken years before. "Dad," she asked, "were you sad when Mom left?" Brian thought for a few seconds. And answered with quiet honesty, "I was. But sometimes things have to break to show what they were really made of." The little girl nodded, as if she had understood more than any adult involved in that entire story. That night, Brian looked at the quiet house, his sleeping children, and the simple peace he had rebuilt with his own hands, and he realized something fundamental. He had never lost to Klaus. He had never lost to a more handsome, smarter, or more interesting rival. In reality, Amanda had lost. She lost a loyal man, a present father, a stable partner. All of that in exchange for adrenaline, validation, and a man who looked like he had stepped out of the wrong line of evolution. And perhaps that was the most ironic part of the whole story. Brian spent months believing he had been replaced, when, in reality, he had simply been set free. So now I want to know from you, what would hurt more, discovering a betrayal, or realizing that someone destroyed their own family for something so absurdly mediocre? Leave your opinion in the comments because I truly love reading every message you write. And if you enjoy stories with twists, sarcasm, and those truths that hurt more than slaps, subscribe to Daily Stories Archive, turn on the bell, and share this video with someone who needs to remember one very important thing. Sometimes, the greatest deliverance of your life arrives disguised as humiliation.